There are all these life-threatening viruses that we are encountering now. And there's violence and there's hatred all around. Islamic extremists, life-threatening drought, and now, earthquakes. This is what a woman told Linda about a week and a half ago as she was at Home Depot. She was talking to this woman who was interviewing her. It was not one of the staff members there. It was someone else that got a contract in. She was talking about water usage and just doing an interview and showing some of the equipment she had when something came up about what is it that you do. Big mistake for a minister. She said, "I'm a minister." To which the woman then replied, "Oh, thank God." And anytime that's said to Linda or I, we always want to go, why? But at any rate, that's what usually happens. Thank God, and then any number of things happen. Confessions, prayers on the spot. But this woman instead decided to let loose of all of her anxieties. The world is just coming. It's going down the tubes without a prayer. And then she said, "You know, these are all signs. It's coming." And Linda was like, "What?" Which, of course, threw the woman for a moment. She said, "Jesus." Now, I'm going to say this just because I have this, and I'm going to see how comfortable you are with this. But I have a T-shirt at home that I bought years and years ago and passed it out to all of my friends. In fact, ordered many of them. It says, "Jesus is coming." Then underneath it says, "Look busy." Nobody's walking yet. Okay. You know, in reality, Linda talked with this woman for some time. This woman was clearly overwhelmed with fears. They were based in her beliefs. But all of the things that she was seeing around her confirmed those fears and beliefs. And so Linda said to her, and I'm so proud of her. I mean, I just thought this was a genius response. She said, "Let me ask you, would you prefer to live out your life in fear of what's happening as you see it, as a confirmation of the Bible, however, but would you prefer to live your life out of fear, or would you prefer to live out your days by the commandment which Jesus taught, to love one another?" And she said, "Oh, no. I think you are right. We are taught to love, and I love everyone, and I pray for everyone that they would come to know Jesus. And when I see my friends, I tell them because I know that the time has come." It just kind of reinforced everything, at which point Linda just kind of smiled and realized there was not going to be much further to go. This poem that I came across by Anne Hillman I thought was fascinating. When we think about what it means to do time in this kingdom that Jesus sort of revealed to everyone, this kingdom in our midst now, do we live it out of fear, or do we live it with something else, with some other motivation? And so she writes in this poem, "We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers." And I love this phrase, "to a softer, more permeable aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death." I'm not sure I know what that aliveness is. But I think that may be what the woman at Home Depot really was looking for. But for some reason, for any number of reasons, couldn't get connected with it. And so like a lot of people, whether of people of faith or not, she's biding time. She's just passing through. She's a pilgrim waiting for the next reality, waiting for heaven. This earth is just passing by. A lot of folks we know are sort of like that, plodding along, living out their days, surviving, avoiding fear, preoccupying themselves with whatever they can. There's so much going on around the world that is so frightening. And as I said in my prayer, the more we think about it, the more we focus on it, it's really a devastating, depressing reality. And I meant it when I said it. Thank God there's football. I watched every single college playoff game. At one point, I caught myself going, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm stuck to this TV. But I watched every one of them. And then I got vehemently opposed to what they decided with one school over another school. And I got caught up like I was watching some soap opera. And I loved it. When my wife came home and told me about this story, she said to me, she said, you know, Tom, she said, beliefs are dangerous, aren't they? Well, the reality is a lot of us don't think too much about beliefs. And by us, I'm speaking generically beyond even these walls. We think too much about beliefs, and then we sort of have to really sit back and define them and justify them and defend them and logically argue out their possible meaning and what they actually mean for us or what they can't possibly mean. Why do we say we believe these things? Beliefs can be dangerous. But I think it's interesting when Jesus calls Nathanael, in fact, when he's calling all of the disciples early on, he doesn't say first thing, believe in me. In fact, that only happens a couple of times where Jesus actually says, believe in me. Jesus is always saying, follow me. Do what I do. And I think that we have to think about how we believe, and instead of thinking about our beliefs, perhaps think more about how we behave. I'm reading an interesting book that I would love to get some of you involved in with me. I don't know when we'll start doing this, but I've been thinking about getting a group together. It's a challenging title because it's one of those things that, again, depending on where you come from, what orthodox views you still cling to, even if you're enlightened and beyond where you once were, these views, these beliefs, they're still challenging. They still challenge us. It's hard to let go of these things that have been in our minds and been part of our networks, our neural networks. It's a great book, though. I'm into the first chapter. It's by a woman named Greta Vosper, and it's entitled With or Without God. And it's subtitled, Why How We Live Matters More Than What We Believe. And I have to tell you that the title took me back. Kind of threw me off base at first. She's a Church of Canada minister. Of course, they're Canadians. You know about those people, so what are you going to say? But she's a Church of Canada minister who claims she's an atheist. We got to let go of our definitions, people. The minute we hear that, I already know what we're thinking, right? We all know what a lot of us are thinking. We got to let go of how we define things in order to understand how we might understand one another better, and perhaps how we might live our lives even more deeply. I have this quote that I put in here on purpose, if you look in the bulletin, by Teilhard de Chardin, which says, the whole of life lies in the verb seeing. How we see. I think we have to behave, not believe. Just stay with me. I think it's in our actions. I think it's in how we be that affects the way we want and hope others might learn to be as well. Now, this seems obvious enough because on the one hand, we may want someone to be kind, so we act kind towards them. We want someone to be loving and compassionate, so we act compassionate with them. We want someone to be angry with you or with us, then we act angrily toward them, or impatient or negative. That sort of seems obvious. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. That seems like an obvious relationship, cause and effect. But I think there may be something more here. When I was at a school a few years back, I don't know how many of teachers are in here, but I'm sure there's a few. Our principal invited me to come to this school out in East Texas because he said the kids, this 7th grade group of kids, they're not getting along. They just don't seem focused. They're not connected to what's going on. There's no sense of community. They were about 2-3 months into the school term. He says, I know your background was in psychology and social work, and I know you're a minister, and I know you've been doing storytelling, and you got all these character education. I want you to come speak to the whole 7th grade class for an hour. Tell them stories that talk about unity, that talk about focus, that talk about attention to a purpose. build them up together somehow. Of course, and I thought, well, storytelling is not hard to draw people's attention. Getting them to think about what you're talking about is a whole different story. So I was there sharing stories, and I had a couple of good ones going, and at one point, maybe 45 minutes into my 65, 70-minute set, I had this group of 300 kids in the gymnasium actually focused on me. And not just focused on me, caught up in the narrative. I could almost be one of these Erickson hypnosis kind of folks where I could actually start throwing out sort of suggestive images that would reinforce positive behavior. I mean, they were that in tune with me when I noticed a bat flutter up from behind the bleachers. Now, I kept going, but that bat started flying around some of the kids' heads in the back. I took it as a point of pride that they continued to stay focused on me, except for a couple of girls who were starting to look at this thing flutter around and elbow one another and then kind of crouch. It was 10 feet away from them, but it's a bat. And so one by one, some of them started chattering until pretty soon it was obvious the group was going to fall apart. I stopped and I said, that is a bat. It's a fruit bat. It's fluttering around. It will probably land somewhere. Just be quiet, be still. It won't bother you. It will probably land somewhere. We'll get one of the custodians to open up the door of the gym and it will probably fly out. They trusted me. They got quiet, and we continued to tell the story as they watched this bat kind of flutter away and then flew over to one side of the gym where it landed on one of these little flag post things, little metal pieces out of the wall. It kind of hung right there. It's about 9 feet up. I was thinking this was great. I suspected that the principal who had been watching this whole thing, knowing the intention of what we were all about, had gone off to get the custodian to raise open the door carefully while I'm telling the story. When suddenly I look behind me, and here comes the principal with an 8-9 foot broom with this wide bristle on it, walks across over to the wall while I'm telling the story, and whap! Kills the bat. Some of the kids screamed. Some of the guys were going like, awesome! The bat plopped to the floor. I was kind of stunned. He looked up and said, keep going, no problem. So when the chuckling had settled down, I tried to get back into the story, back to that place where we were all together focused, when all of a sudden I noticed the kids weren't looking at me. They were looking back behind me. And I turned around to see that the principal was now kicking the bat across the gym floor. And it took forever. He kicked this thing across the floor for about 5 minutes. It felt like forever. And the kids were chattering and giggling. And I thought, well, just pick the thing up, But he was kicking it and kind of brushing and kicking it until he got over to the far side. And he looked over and said, I'll get a dustpan and throw it away. And I said, awesome. Thanks. By that point, the kids had kind of lost it. But I kind of got them calmed down just enough to start right back into the story, and the class bell rang. And they all jumped up and rushed out the door. Now, my feelings were hurt that I didn't get to finish a story that I had worked on for a long time, but that wasn't what bothered me the most. And even the principal who came up and said to me, he said, good job. It was going great. He said, I apologize about the bat. And I waited to see what he meant by that. He didn't mean anything other than, I'm sorry there was a bat in your gym, in the performance. And that troubled me more than anything. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives out in Shreveport in the school where this was, and I said, what bothered me wasn't the rudeness. What bothered me wasn't the disruption. I have to deal with that kind of stuff all the time. What bothered me was that the very person who hired me didn't even see what he was doing. He wasn't even aware. And it was his motivation. It was his goal that brought us there. I've been to so many schools sometimes where I see teachers, screaming at kids to be quiet. I love that. Calm down. I love all of that kind of, it's this interesting sort of irony that exists in our behaviors. And I don't exclude us from that. We do it all the time. We say one thing, we do another. The famous adage of the parent to the child, do as I say, not what I do. But I still think it's a little more complicated than that. I don't know if any of you all listen to NPR. I think some of you are NPR listeners. Did anyone listen to This American Life yesterday? Some of you all listened to it? I'll just hint real quickly what happened. It was amazing because it was just, again, another perfect illustration, I think, of where this was going. I didn't know this. I've shared in here before with the whole I Am video and the experiment that the director of I Am showed that you can do with yogurt, affecting yogurt by your thoughts with electrodes and whatnot. And it began with this statement where the interviewer said, "Did you realize you can alter a rat's behavior with your thinking?" And of course, nobody believed that. They actually showed through several different research studies at several different universities that students could alter the behavior of rats by the way they thought. It didn't make sense, though, because no one truly held to a scientific belief in telepathy. There had to be something else, and then they figured out what it was. They had signs that they gave students that said, "Your rats are the stupid ones." First of all, that's what they said. And then make sure you put that up on the maze where the rats are, because they'll see it. And the ones who have the message that says they're stupid, they're going to perform poorly. And they did to a T. And the ones that said the rats are smart, you're smart rats, they performed faster and better, more efficiently than the others. They figured out what was happening. The students treated the rats differently. The students were touching them differently. They were holding them differently. They regarded them differently altogether. It wasn't the telepathy. It was the belief. It was the belief that changed others' behaviors. So then they told this story, and you might have seen this guy, a guy by the name of Daniel Kish. And I want you this evening, around 7 o'clock if you can, go online to NPR, look up This American Life. It's a 40-minute story. It will blow your mind. You will be fascinated with this person. The interviewer said I forget the guy's name, Ira Glass at This American Life. She said, "By the way, not only can you control rats, with your mind," she said, "did you also know that you can see, but you don't have to have eyes? You can see without eyes." And then she told the story of Daniel Kish, who's a guy who's blind, both eyes. He has 2 prosthetic eyes. He rides his bicycle everywhere. Some of you might have even seen him being interviewed on talk shows before. The guy is amazing. When he was a toddler, he lost both eyes to cancer. But over time, he taught himself how to use echolocation by clicking, so that he not only sees things and can find his way along on a bicycle, no less, he actually sees what scientists have come to discover is close to what we see as peripheral vision, because of where the brain processes echolocation. He sees things. But here's the interesting contrast. When you ask his mother why he was able to do this, she said, "Because I never took him to a school for the blind. Because I never let him work with anyone who did rehabilitation with the blind. Because I let him crash every single time he crashed." And the interviewer was like, "Don't you realize he could have killed himself?" She said, "Don't you realize if I'd never allowed him to slam into the pole, then he never would have discovered he was able to see in his own way." When I think about this song by Leon Russell, I think about how many of us are literally sort of rubbernecking our past. How many of us are literally sort of just living out of all of those things wherever we've been told, however we've been told. Not just us, how many people in the world are dealing with that? And the challenge is to try to find some aliveness when you're carrying this sort of history with you. And when you can let go of that, when you can finally figure out a way to let go of that, I think we're getting towards a little bit of what it means to be to do time in the kingdom. What everybody, I think, is looking for, what Anne Hillman says in her poem, this idea of aliveness. Paul Tillich, the theologian out of Chicago in the 60s, said that being alive, truly alive to God, is love. But when he said love, he said, I'm not meaning eros, I'm not meaning the emotion, I'm meaning participation in the midst of life, of being. He said, that's love. He said, love is not an emotion. It becomes too controllable at that point. It's determined by beliefs. He said love is being in participation. He said the best way to understand it is being alive. So over the next 4 weeks here, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to sort of have a series and to think with you a little bit about what it means to be alive in the world, to take a phrase from Jackson Brown, what it means to find this aliveness, how we measure time, how we think about our stories. And I want to conclude with what I hope will be an unusually fun and enlightening Sunday entitled Dancing with Bears. Any of y'all remember the old Scout song? Anybody? You're in for a treat. As Jesus said to Nathanael, if you're a little surprised now, you ain't seen nothing yet. I'm going to bring the band up here, and they're going to end with a great song from the Beatles. Y'all sing along with it, and then Roger Partridge is here with us, and he's going to share a very short word about what's going on with the church as a whole. I'll invite you to come up with, as they start to finish, Roger. All right.